Hello listeners, Jordan here. I just want to let you know that you can listen to Nighttime early and ad-free on Amazon Music. Include it with Prime.
You are listening to the Nighttime Podcast.
A 6-year-old child is in hospital after they were stabbed multiple times in downtown Halifax. Police responded to the 1900 block of Barrington Street at around 12 p.m. Sunday afternoon. The child was rushed by ambulance to the IWK Health Center with life-threatening injuries. The suspect, a 19-year-old woman, was apprehended at the scene and charged with aggravated assault. Police don't believe the victim and the suspect are known to each other.
Hello listeners, and welcome back to Nighttime. In this episode, we're going to again be exploring the story of Elliott Chorny, the young woman recently charged in the unprovoked attack on a 6-year-old boy at a Halifax bus stop. In our prior episode on this case, Madeline Klein and I used news reports and Elliott's own writing to try and understand how an unimaginable incident like this could happen. And I think we got close. But tonight, we're going to get much closer. The attack on the child we still know very little about, but the circumstances that lead up to it, well, tonight, we're going to go through that in painful detail thanks to the willingness and, frankly, the bravery of one of the only people capable of sharing it, Elliott's mother, Andrea. Andrea offered to join me for a discussion about her daughter Elliott's life, her sudden descent into mental illness, the many attempts to find her appropriate treatment, and ultimately, the circumstances that lead to Elliott bouncing between shelters at the height of her illness. But before we start that, I want to make one thing very clear. Andrea isn't agreeing to share her story as a way to feed the sort of morbid curiosity about the case, or as a way to gain empathy for her daughter that's soon going to be facing the courts. She made it clear that she is dedicating her advocacy for better mental health treatment to the victim of her daughter's actions, that child's family, and everyone else affected by mental illness in Nova Scotia. Andrea's own words will explain her motivation better than I could. The first question I ask her is if she had been in contact with the victim or their family. And to my surprise, her answer begins by thanking them and evolves into Andrea speaking directly to them and giving a promise that she will fight the powers that be to fix the system that was unable to stop Elliott from doing what she did at the bus stop on that horrible day. You haven't had any contact with the victim or their family, but before we started recording tonight, you were discussing how thankful you were for them. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
They're in my thoughts more than people understand. What they did that day, they acted with humanity and they held down Elliott, and at that point they could have really hurt her after she hurt their child, and I can imagine that was hard. And I will never be able to make up for you not harming her when she did the worst thing I could ever imagine. I know that you probably don't even want to hear me or look at me or anything, but I do hope that I can do everything I can from now on to try and make up for this, what my daughter did. And I want to try and make things safer for your child. And I'm fighting desperately so your child, who has obvious trauma, and you as well, will be able to get mental health help when you need it, because this is a scary thing, and trauma begets trauma. So sorry doesn't even, I will never be able to ever express how sorry I am, but I will do everything I can to make up or try to fix what I can.
Now, I hope that short piece serves as a sort of mission statement for what you're about to hear. Over the next 70 minutes or so, Elliott's mother, Andrea, is going to reveal her family's story of dealing with extreme mental illness, from childhood obsessive thoughts right up to the present-day worst-case scenario. So with all that said, let's get into it. Tonight, on this episode of Nighttime, Andrea Hancock will share the story of her daughter, Elliott Chorny, and provide a mother's perspective of this preventable tragedy.
Police say the suspect is 19-year-old Elliott Chorny. She appeared in Halifax court on Monday afternoon to face charges of attempted murder and possession of a dangerous weapon. Police say the suspect and child were not known to each other, making this a random incident.
When did you first notice signs that Elliott was struggling in some way or had some kind of challenges related to mental health? Because my understanding is she grew up as pretty much just as a normal little girl, but when is it that you first started seeing, something's different about Elliott?
It was when she was 7, and it actually happened quite quickly, like within a couple days. And she started focusing. Now I understand it's OCD type of stuff, but just playing stuff in her mind over and over and over, making things need to be a certain way. She was really afraid of her health and the health of the people she loved around her. She would make up little nutritional type things, like little diet plans so that they could live longer and have no heart attacks.
Okay.
And that year for her birthday, we actually gave her a cake, a watermelon cake.
Mm-hmm.
So the cake was actually a watermelon, and it was decorated, and we had like fruits and stuff all over it. So it wasn't actually cake. It was a slice. It was an actual watermelon, because she was so afraid of eating something unhealthy. It was concerning because she was developing tics as well, and she was getting agitated quickly too. She would have explosive just moments, and it was, within 2 days. So I thought maybe something happened to her. Did she hit her head? Was she harmed in some way that I don't know? I was scared. I was really scared for her.
And this is what we're describing now, is kind of starting around when she's 7, but it seems like what we're actually talking about is like the first signs that she probably had problems with obsession and compulsion. And I believe she eventually would receive a diagnosis for having OCD.
Yes, yeah. She was diagnosed with OCD when she was 7. Actually, she was diagnosed with pandas, and then her doctor said that how she got it was probably pandas. But now that she has the OCD and all that stuff, that's what they treat, is they treat the OCD and stuff. But pandas is actually an autoimmune disorder.
I promise I'm not going to pull us out of the discussion often, but I want to stop here just briefly and provide a bit more explanation, as this was a really eye-opening piece for me. Before speaking with Andrea, I had never heard of Pandas disease, and I imagine a lot of you out there haven't either. Pandas is a rare condition where a child's immune system mistakenly begins to attack their own brain while fighting off a certain type of strep infection. Pandas can lead to sudden and severe symptoms like OCD, extreme anxiety, physical tics, and mood swings. And it happens almost overnight. When I came into this conversation with Andrea, I expected her to describe the slow onset of symptoms for Elliott. But that's not how it happens. With pandas, it's basically overnight. And as a parent myself, that's simply terrifying. But now that we all know what pandas is, let's get back to the talk with Andrea. So we talked a bit about the early signs that something was going on, which seemed to be obsessive thoughts about health and food. Can you tell me how that began to evolve as she aged?
She would be frantic about watching what sugars and things, how much certain things are, and it would have to be a pure sugar. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't about body image. This was about health, mm-hmm. and and life, trying to preserve health, to have nobody die around her. So she was really scared that, and also just be pure, having pure things. It developed further into having a pure day. That means it became where she was scared about things around her. Like if people said bad words, in her words, bad words. Now, we're not a religious family, mm-hmm. but Elliott considered, when people said, "Oh my God," she was like, she would tell them on the playground, she would say, "That's a bad word, that's a bad word." And so she started to get picked on for it, of course. So Elliott would do things like social things that really separated her from other kids. And it was usually in an effort to have this unattainable sense of good and pure. And it was just never good enough for her OCD because it never is. And so she would wake up, and if she woke up and something didn't happen right, she'd put the toast into the toaster before she got the plate, or she did something out of what she felt like was the order, then the whole day is ruined and she has to start over for the
Wow.
next day. And so every day there was never anything that went perfectly. And so she had to start over. She had Christmas gifts that she couldn't open and birthday gifts that she couldn't open because she had to wait until it was a good day and it was a pure day. So she would have those for months and months and months.
Wow. And you, as her mom, standing by watching her kind of torment herself like this, did you have any ability to reason with her or like talk her out of this kind of way of thinking?
Actually, we did a lot of therapy, and it was she did the exposure therapy, so we were learning that as a family. I didn't even know what OCD was really. I also, just like autism, I was naive in my understanding. It was very surface based, and so we had to kind of work on exposure therapy and do things very slowly. So we eventually got those presents opened, and she was eventually able to move to actual cakes. Um, that doesn't mean that we didn't have times when it changed. It went it back and forth. It sometimes, and I found especially with transition times
Mm,
or times when something happened, say her when her nanny and Umpa's cat passed away, she would kind of regress again,
mhm,
and that was it's ongoing. It was ongoing.
mhm. But all this to say is from the time she started exhibiting signs of obsessive thoughts, it was a big part of your life and her life to manage it and try to overcome it. Like, was it, oh, I guess what I'm asking is there ever a time that it got better or did it progressively seem to get harder and harder as she grew up?
I think that it changed forms,
Mhm,
so it got sometimes a little more complicated.
mhm,
When her peers were talking about, they're changing bodies, or their, different interests, um, it really stressed her out, and we would find it would bring a whole new type of fears.
mhm,
So later on, it was about when people were, kids were, getting little crushes and stuff like that. She was like, that is bad. That is bad.
mhm,
Sexuality is bad. When she started realizing that some people smoke more, like, around her or whatever. If she saw people on the street, she's like, you know, and she would say things. It was very hard for her to see, and she thought that she was being contaminated in her brain as well.
wow.
So if somebody said things that were, or she couldn't watch certain things because she felt like it was not good and not pure.
Mhm. As this goes on and gets worse and worse, like was her response to kind of close in on herself, or how did like without
Yes.
your intervention, how was Elliot dealing with it?
Well, I'm actually surprised that she was seeing as how severe her thoughts were with how much torment they were putting her through. Um, she was able to be as well adjusted at that time as
Mhm,
she was, because it was quite a severe OCD. And the thing is one of the things that OCD does is it tries to alienate you, and it tries to isolate. That avoidance is the number one thing that OCD will do, is I'm just not going to do that thing, or I'm going to do this so that this doesn't happen. It's always about the fear of the thing, and that is exactly what she would tend to do, which if you give into that, it makes it very difficult because avoidance is never tackling the OCD. It's always about avoiding. So yes, she had the tendency to do that.
And give me an example, like of her avoiding something that she may have obsessive thoughts about. Like, can you think of a specific example?
I'm coming back to this as an example, but I mean the avoiding death by trying to make herself absolutely healthy. She had to look at the clock each night and close her eyes, blink until it felt right to avoid having a bad day the next day. Later on, it became more of an avoid as far as isolating herself, like staying away from people, not choosing not to join things. And I mean, this is a girl that would come home and say, hi, I joined basketball. And I'm thinking, do you even know how to, like, do you know anything about basketball? Or like, I joined band or, something like that. And we'd be like, okay, we know what we're doing for the next while. And then it's like she just isolated. She didn't want to go even on the deck. She didn't want to do uh, hang out with it. Going to her friend's house was a lot difficult, even though it was 3 doors down. A lot more difficult. She would just try to avoid.
Mhm.
And this later comes up into what we see now is she has her OCD is very about pureness and goodness, is about not being sexually objectified and being seen in a sexual way. And so by doing that, she avoids going out of the house. She walks a very kind of rigid and robotically because she doesn't feel comfortable in her body.
Mhm.
And she has trouble eating in public. She won't eat in public. She's gone days where she was at the home and there was no other place for her to eat. She wouldn't eat. She just wouldn't eat. She
Because she didn't want to be seen eating, because she perceived it as maybe being like objectified or sexualized in some way.
Yes, yeah, she was worried that people would look at her and think she was eating in a sexual way or walking in a sexual way.
Wow.
And it was very scary for her.
Okay. And is that like, I know that's something that was happening later in life, but when did that start? Like when, especially with her walking, because one of the things that the public knows about is a series of posts she made online where she seemed to be inviting someone to help her by almost like chauffeuring her on walks around Halifax. Like when and throughout that post, she describes feelings of this idea that everyone is making fun of her because of the way she walks, and there's something like objectively wrong with the way she walks, and so she needs help. When did you first notice walking specifically being something that she was obsessing with?
I don't necessarily remember, but I also know that Elliot, it doesn't start out on the outside of her body. It starts out where she's thinking things a lot that
Mhm.
are relentlessly thinking things in her mind.
Mhm.
And so it is true. She was afraid of people making fun of her, of course, and but that was realistic because she had that in the past,
Mhm.
but also it was also sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. She didn't want to be made fun of, so she was thinking of it so much, so then she was walking a little differently, which would bring attention, and then she
Mhm.
would have anxiety from the attention, and her facial expressions she would feel like were not working out, and she always had trouble. People have always said stuff about her facial expressions, and that's why the smirk, so it wasn't a smirk.
Yeah, and when you
She
say the
has
smirk, she's been the video of her walking into the courtroom
yes.
after the incident. A lot of people have felt like and commented that they felt like she was almost had like an evil smirk on her face, as if she was proud of herself. But when you see the photo of her quote unquote smirking towards the camera, what's your read on that?
Well, everybody who knows Elliot is like, I know exactly what she was doing at that time, and because that's part of her stress is that she will smile a lot or she won't, for so many like, her facial expressions don't match the actual moment, and I've got told that was from her autism. I don't know, but I think part of it is also a little anxiety.
Mhm.
She's always had a smiles when she was stressed out and really afraid. So there was all these cameras on her walking. She's there with police officers, which is very scary for her. And she was there walking into court, which was unfamiliar for her. Everything was, no matter who you are, you're afraid.
Mhm.
And especially somebody who is naive and doesn't actually, this all is new for her.
Mhm.
So just the fact that they were all focused in on her, that is a nightmare for Elliott.
Mhm. Okay. So rather than it being like a grin or a smirk, it's probably just more of something like stress meets like a puzzled understanding of how to even react in that situation. Is that maybe more appropriate?
Absolutely. I mean, she does that in regular situations
Hmm.
sometimes, and she hasn't been able to walk when we would go up to the city to visit her. Actually, the last time we visited her, we took her to the library, and she actually made it long enough to actually pick out 2 books and check them out. And it was very hard for her, but usually her facial expressions or the way she walks or something she is so focused on that she can't be in a store successfully, and she has to leave partway in between. So that's a big thing. And so yes, I don't know if that answers your
Yeah.
question.
Okay.
Sorry.
But through our talk now, we're slowly kind of seeing the struggles that we're developing and that she was dealing with. But I think what a lot of people don't understand is how she went from living in your home to living like in a shelter, basically in downtown Halifax. And I can only assume, being a parent myself, that that must have been the last resort for you to allow her to leave the home to go instead to a like a shelter or similar in Halifax. So that's something I'd like to hear about. Is like I imagine there's a period of time where you're seeking out support and not able
Yeah.
to get it, and it leads to this. So maybe I'll just give you the floor to kind of walk through the attempts you made to get her support, and eventually ending with why her leaving the home was the ultimate choice. Like, I know that's a big question and a big topic to address, but I know a lot of people are curious about this. I'm going to pull us out of the conversation at this point for a brief ad break. When we get back to the discussion, we're going to skip ahead to Elliott's teenage years and her worsening mental illness resulting in her leaving the family home. As we'll soon hear, Elliott's move to a shelter was the result of several parallel but unrelated events. Perhaps most significantly among them, her decision to stop taking her medicine, and her decision to reconnect with her estranged biological father, who also had suffered with extreme mental illness. We're going to get into all that after this short break.
At that time, she wasn't in school anymore. She dropped out. Her biological father passed away, and she was just getting to know him for a few months, and so that hit her pretty hard.
Maybe just to
And
give a bit of background, is I'm led to believe that her biological father also had mental illness.
actually very similar to Elliott's. Very, uh, very, very similar to Elliott's. And yes, he did, and she got a couple things from him and his side of the family. She got his side of the family's intelligence with her grandparents were mathematicians, and her biological father was a history and philosophy professor. But the mental health conditions that he had was absolutely really OCD related, extreme. I didn't know what OCD was at that time. They scared me. The 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 way of his thinking and just not being able to let things go was terrifying.
Mm.
He became abusive when I was pregnant, and I left him when she was 6 weeks old because I didn't want her to grow up with that. He did attack me in a public place, so I was able to physically get away, whereas before I wasn't able to get away because he was there every second. I couldn't close the bathroom door. I couldn't do anything without him being there.
Mhm.
So,
So you
yeah.
you leave with Elliot when she's a baby with the idea of raising her away from all of this. I guess about a year before this incident is when she begins to reconnect with him.
Yeah, so when she was 18, there was two decisions she made. And she's like, I'm an adult now. I want to try to go off my medication, and um, I want to reach out to my biological father, see if I can, get some questions answered and some history, family history, and things like that. And I was terrified for both things.
Mhm.
I told her, don't tell her where we live. Don't tell him where we live. Don't tell him where our phone number, kind of things that can make him be near us, because at this point, I had no connections with him. I didn't even want him being anywhere near her or me or anyone, because he was beyond violent to
Mhm.
me. He's very scary. But anyway, I said, yes, just be very careful. And with the medication, technically, I could never make her take her medication. It's against the law to force someone to take their medication. After 12 years old, they're really, really have their absolute say in what treatment they want.
Mhm.
We said, you need to, if you're going to be here, and if you're going to be, you need to be safe to yourself and us. So you need to be on medication, and you need to go to therapy, and you need to get these things have to be done.
Mhm.
But technically, I actually didn't have any authority of that. And I don't think a lot of people understand that.
Mm. Okay. And then especially so when she's 18, she can do whatever she wants medically at that point, I assume.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm.
And so she did go off, and I tried to make up the contracts like we used to have in the past, when if she tried to go off her medication, which was, I think, two or three times before over the years, we had it was done with the doctor, and it was done um, with a promise that if things start to get um, out of hand, like if things start to get kind of like if her mental health declines and she is becoming scary to herself or others, then I need her to understand that. And so, yeah, and so we did have a therapist coming still.
Mhm.
She came to the house because Elliot wasn't able to leave at that point. And during all this, after her biological father passed, things got extremely bad. And it was around the time that she quit school because of that.
Yeah,
And
and just to tie this together is she reconnected with her biological father. They began to form a relationship, and then shortly after he passed away.
yes, he actually would say things like, "Oh, you're keeping me alive," and things like that that were ended up really harming her later, and it really messed her up. And yeah, so and he was at that point, his life took a severe turn. Or not at that point, but just before she contacted him. Since I knew him, his life went downhill quite a bit. He wasn't a professor anymore. He was in the homeless shelter. He was started doing drugs, and um, was addicted to uh, methamphetamine, like different kind of things. And so he wasn't well
Mhm.
anyway. The conversations were, I guess, I told her at the beginning of it that it could be private, but please make sure the safety is a concern.
Mhm.
And now I'm only finding out what type of things he said, and it was really damaging to her, and it breaks my heart. And anyway, Yeah.
Yeah, but he would go on to pass away, and like the trauma and shock of that is ultimately what leads to her leaving school.
Yeah, she absolutely, she quit school, and they kept saying, "You actually have everything except for the gym credit, and just hand in this stuff." Like, her marks were great. She got honors with distinction the year before,
Mhm.
and she on purpose took all the science classes that she could on purpose because, quote, "This is the only time that education will be free, so I'm going to take advantage of it." So she actually, her quitting was quite significant because it's also part of her identity is trying to do well and learn. She was all about learning. So
Yeah, and also it seems like she also had like a lot of long-term goals. I want to live long, I want to be prepared for the future, where this seems to be more, this act of like quitting school seems to be a bit like dropping out.
it was dropping out, and then
Mm.
she sees that because of her black and white thinking, she sees that as she failed everything and now she ruined everything, and like it just compounds. The decision she makes when she's mentally unwell
Hmm.
compounds everything, and her outbursts would get a lot more frequent. I was usually at the receiving end of those outbursts. I had a safety plan for her younger brother, and I tried to keep everything very separate from him as much as I could, but it was exhausting, and it was a lot. Even though I grew up in foster care, I decided that I should reach out to social services for help
Hmm.
because even though she was getting all that I knew she could have as far as help, it wasn't enough. We needed something ha- uh, more.
Hmm.
And so from there, they assessed the situation and stuff, and they were trying to put things in place with whatever resources they had. However, certain services that they have didn't actually she didn't qualify for, say, like the adolescent agreement plan, where they would um, pair the youth up with a worker, and they would kind of guide them through things and get them to be independent living and help them with lots of different things. She didn't. A, she was too far gone by that point. B, she was also not. She didn't qualify because she was the safety risk in our home, but her home wasn't the safety risk for her.
And what you mean by that is, let's say if there was problems in the house, there's substance abuse with the other family members and stuff, they may pull her out of it. But if she's the problem, the safety risk, let's say that's there's no intervention.
Yeah, she doesn't qualify. If she's 18, she doesn't qualify.
Hmm.
She doesn't qualify after you're 16, actually.
Hmm.
It's they don't take youth into care. They don't take youth into group homes or anything. They just have this adolescent service agreement.
Hmm.
And if she was the one having the outburst, then we were told, we know that she has these mental health issues and we know that she's struggling, but for the safety of your son, if she's like this, you can have him here or her here, but this is too volatile and dangerous.
Okay.
So at first they let it be where we had a safety plan for him and make sure they go after the safety plans. But when we took her to the doctor, because things got really out of hand even more, and I was just struggling so hard, every day felt like a crisis. We were calling the mental health hotline. I mean, I was scared, and we were all scared, and it was always something. At that point, I had to quit my job, and because she was just very scary.
Did this ever turn to, or did you ever have fear of self-harm with her? Like, because I know, like, at least in her online writings recently, that's something that she didn't seem to be afraid to talk about. Was that something you heard of or were concerned with?
Yes, I've had calls to social services, to the police, to the um, her doctor, her therapist, everything. She would have feelings of this. intrusive thought where she felt like she had to cut off 3 of her fingers to have something die, because she was not good, and so if that thing died, then maybe she could start over. And OCD doesn't make any sense.
Mhm.
It's not rational, but it is relentless.
And when you say an
And
intrusive thought, like she went back to this idea of I need to cut off fingers?
it's like the nightmare version of having a song stuck in your head
Mm-hmm.
when you don't want it, and it goes on for a long time, but it's just as relentless. You can't stop humming it or thinking of it or singing it, and that drives me crazy. That's really hard. So yes, that is what OCD can
Mm-hmm.
be like. Anyway, at that point I brought her to the doctor, and that's she assaulted me in the doctor's office, and that's when they said she is not to be going home.
You
Like
said she assaulted you in a doctor's office? Okay.
yes.
Okay. And sorry, and how did they react to seeing this?
They well, the doctor was actually they stayed so late that day they got on the phone with a lot of different places. The doctor seemed had a connection with somebody in the Phoenix house, and they were able to. Elliott expressed that if she wasn't going to live at home, she wants to go to a shelter like her biological father, and that scared me because I know what shelters are like, but that's what she decided. Um, and I wasn't, she's at that age where she's an adult, so she can go on her own. So I never kicked her out. As a matter of fact, I remember saying over and over, she is a vulnerable person and she's not well. And her to be without a home or without any kind of residential group home or a care home or a place that is specific people with mental health issues, she is will not be safe, and neither will people around her. Well, I didn't realize that people at that point that so much of it would be about the people around her, like what happened on that
Mm-hmm.
terrible day. But I thought she would be victimized. I thought she's naive. She's still like, this is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong, and then now she's going to see a world in which she never saw before.
Wow. All this to say is for some people in the public see her leaving the home as a way of you kind of just like washing your hands with the situation, but it certainly isn't that way. There's no there isn't a place you can send a mentally unwell adult to live in a kind of a hospital like setting and be looked after. That isn't an easy option to attain in Nova
And
Scotia.
not even,
No, that's right.
yeah, not even a hospital type setting, but even like a residential care home, like a uh, where it's more of a home setting, but with therapy. There's that as far as I'm told, that doesn't exist.
Hmm.
I'm still not sure. I still haven't got the answers if it exists in Halifax or not. Whatever the case is, I've asked probably over 100 times to so many people and so many different types of care people that we encountered over the years, and this is not something that is
Hmm.
accessible if it does exist.
Hmm.
Yeah.
We can get now to Elliot leaving the home. So as you described there, there were very few options. Basically, Elliot or her younger brother um, seemed to need to leave the house. Tell me about her actually leaving the house and what your initial thoughts were about her in the state she was in, going out into the world in the way that she was. Like, walk me through the time that she actually left and where she was going and how she got there.
I was terrified. I was the doctor had the contact that he knew. They came down to the office there and talked to us about it and tried to let her know the real actual um the risks and what it would be like in the shelter, and try to dissuade her and try to do a different get something else, although they admittedly said there was nothing else.
Mhm.
So I don't know what, if she didn't pick the shelter, what they were going to do. um but then they set it up where she would get her stuff and we'd drive her down and she would go. And that broke my heart because she's very naive and she's very, when it comes to real world stuff, she wasn't around people with substance abuse. She wasn't around any kind of like, she's small town. She didn't even go on the bus with all walks of life. Like, I feel like she was unprepared.
Mhm.
And that was a big fear of mine, and that she would be vulnerable. I knew that she would be the least likely one to be targeted for like trafficking or anything like that, because she is so against substance abuse and like different kinds of like sexuality. She was like had a thing about and all that stuff. She had trouble with, she wouldn't be taken in by a lot of the same ways that some other people would be.
Where is it that she initially goes? It's a like a homeless shelter in downtown Halifax?
Phoenix House, yeah.
Okay. And how did
Yeah.
she feel? Like, was she like, this is the start I need? Or like, what was Elliot's reaction to this? Because it's like, it sounds like being isolated in rural Nova Scotia to living in a homeless shelter, basically downtown Halifax, seems like two opposite sides of a very large spectrum.
So Elliot was always, whenever she was going to do something and she wanted to change something, there wasn't small steps to it, there was huge steps to it.
Mm.
So, for instance, if she wanted to, her depression got really bad and isolation, what she decided was she was going to take a very extremely cold shower every single morning, wake up at 5 in the morning, and then, do some knitting, have this certain kind of breakfast. Like, Elliot was very, 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 there's no small changes. So
Okay.
for her to do that, go from isolation to living with a whole bunch of people, we knew that wouldn't work out because large leaps are very difficult, especially for somebody who has trouble regulating their emotions and dealing with things. And so it was almost not surprising how surprising it was that she was so adamant about it. It was almost like not surprising in a
Mhm.
way.
Mhm.
And also, when she got there, she was like, oh, yes, this forces me to be in front of people. So, in a way, she was thinking that this would challenge her. However, if you're talking about OCD and challenging or any anxiety or something, you don't jump into the deep end. You need to do it slowly, the little steps. That's how you work into it. And so this was almost destined for Elliot's to have it. And it made me terrified and heartbroken, and that's not the way I want to send her out in the world. And it was just like there was no other way. And they're saying, well, she's an adult, so she's got to do this, but yet emotionally she's not an adult.
Mhm. Mhm.
She's
Yeah, and I see like through her online writings that she was posting during her time in the shelter. I get it. I can see through her own words the obsessive thoughts and the paranoia and all these things that she was dealing with. But I'm assuming you had like phone calls and visits with her while she was living there. What was the sense you had? Like, did it seem like it was going well, or was it getting worse? And also, I'm wondering what kind of care she was getting there. Like, was she completely on her own devices while living there, or was she still needing to meet with therapists and whatnot?
So the first time that she was there, it didn't go so well. Um, it did a little bit at first, but it came to when she has to eat and with people. And the other thing is that Elliot has, um, she's very, very, very smart book-wise, but when, say, she's trying to navigate her surroundings, it was very difficult. So she got lost almost every single day. And
Oh.
she also, at the shelter, you have to leave the shelter every single day. and go out and just be out in the world.
Mm.
And that was where Elliott was, that's where the majority of the stress came from. And also that she got lost. So when they wrote down, they even wrote maps and stuff, and she got lost all the time. When she got back a couple minutes late, and they're like, well, sorry, the bed's closed. And she was frantic because she was like, I gotta be outside. And then and that was like, it was already a frantic day. Every day that she had to go out, she was made to go out. It was like taking that one step further and having to be thrown out
Wow.
really to the deep end again, even more. Sometimes it is a little difficult for people to get out. And that's the other thing, is that she landed in the shelter because of her mental illness. Well, the shelters aren't really equipped for dealing with that. That doesn't help people's mental illness. So like, that is another area that if she would have been in the right residence,
Mhm.
and she would have been able to do this, then it wouldn't have been so incompatible,
Mhm.
and she wouldn't have had her like crisis thinking, you know?
I'm going to stop the conversation at this point for our last ad break of the night. But when we get back into the discussion, things are really going to start picking up. At this point in the story we're hearing, Elliott is in her first of several shelters that she's going to bounce between. But she's not going to be here long, as an outburst is going to result in her being forced to leave. And from there, we'll hear her slowly evolve into the version of Elliott that shows up at the bus stop that day. We'll get into all that after this short break.
She had a big outburst there. She smashed the plates. That's what she
Okay,
did.
I read
because,
about smashing dishes. Yeah. What?
Yes, yeah. It was just about her. They have to eat together, and she felt like somebody would misconstrue her eating with sexuality or something, and so it was an intrusive thought, and it made her afraid, and she would miss dinner a lot. Elliott was sometimes so removed from people and things around her that she wasn't present. Like she didn't realize, like, oh, everyone's getting up and going this way. This is what this means. It was a disconnect.
Okay. So she's in the first place. She eventually has the incident with the dishes, and then she kind of went
Yeah.
through several other shelters.
Well, the police took her, and then they figured out that they would take her to Silverton, and that was a really good place. She actually had a really good interaction with a girl that was there, and they went to the grocery store together, and she played a couple board games with her, and she felt like she finally maybe has a friend. And she hasn't had a single friend since grade 9.
Mm.
So this was huge for her.
Mm.
And then the friend had to leave. So she got a home. She got a resident or wherever she was waiting for, which is wonderful. But then Elliott got another roommate who was made fun of her a bit, and like was a little bit more like alienating her and stuff. And so she left there one day, and she was doing really well there, and they had a little more services. It was quieter than the one in Halifax. It was less chaos. And so, not that it's chaos in Phoenix, I think they're do really well for what they do. But it was just quieter, so it fit her better. So she left there, and she went and hitchhiked. She just told me the next day, oh, by the way, I'm in Truro. And then they had no beds there, so she had to stay out all night. And it was the next day when I found out she stayed out all night. And anyway, and she hitchhiked for the first time, and I'm thinking, oh my God. And then she went from there, and she said, oh yes, I'll have a bed. They'll have a bed for me today. Well, apparently they didn't. So the next phone call I got was in New Brunswick, and she hitchhiked there.
Wow.
And she was staying there, and it was really rough in the place she was staying at. And she was really bothered there was like vomit on the locker by her bed, and there was like all this stuff. And so she calls frantic. She's like, Mom, I don't know what to do. And she had another freak out about the eating incident, and she was having to go. So we were able to get her, get a drive from a worker there or something to get to Halifax. And then from there, her auntie picked her up and brought her to our house.
Okay.
So she was back home by this point. So then that's when we were like, what do we do? Because I don't know. So anyway, she stayed here for a little bit and then she started having her outbursts again and things got scary again and I didn't know how to keep everyone safe. And I asked, like, what can I do? Like, please, is there anything still? Like, I was still trying to find people, even family members for her to go to. But by that point, she's also very, well, they had their own things going on too.
Mm.
And she was staying, prior to this, throughout this time, she was staying with her auntie in Halifax. And that was good. But her auntie, it was really good for her, but by this point she was too sick and she said, well, she can't stay here because I got a lot of things going on.
Mm.
And at the time, my cousin, her daughter, my auntie's daughter, was she was in the election.
Yeah. Okay.
And so, yeah. And so basically,
I didn't realize there was this much moving, but she was in, the shelters in Halifax. She then kind of did like this hitchhiking thing to Truro, New Brunswick. She's back home. And it seems like you're almost back in the same situation as before she left, which is like, what are we going to do here?
I didn't know what to do. I honestly don't. And I am scared she might have an outburst and like the house will burn down, she'll burn the house down or something. Like I was scared.
Mm.
So I'm trying to keep everyone safe. And I know that her being here isn't helping her mental health because we have no resources. I was hoping that she would get on the disability supports program. It's very voluntary based, and she wasn't settled in her mind enough even to have the conversation at that point. People found it very frustrating, very difficult because she kept going all over the place with her thoughts, and they couldn't even focus to get a form signed. Like
Okay.
just to by that point she was so out of whack with it. And so she went to the Mary's Boat Club or something like that, or it's a impromptu shelter. I think it's called Mary's Boat Club. And then she went to the Forum, and that is another shelter that they put up. And then when she went to the hospital, that was in January, the police brought her to the place, to the hospital, and they didn't deem her because she wasn't trying to kill herself. She was just trying to make.
Yeah, and I want you to explain this. So this incident in January, the way, like in listening to the news, it seems like it was a suicide attempt where somebody saw her on a bridge and she ended up at a hospital and in some way assaulted a doctor or some kind of medical person. What actually happened? Like what went on in January and why was she on the bridge?
I'm not really sure because she already was on the bridge. She was taken off of another bridge from the police took her off. It was on another incident a little bit before that as well.
Okay.
This other bridge that she was on this day, part of Elliott's OCD was this persistent thought that she believes that something has to die on her in proportion to how much of the stagnant corrosive energy she has. So that means absolutely, I don't even know what that means, but to her, it these things mean something, and they're very, very real for her. These thinking, it's relentless, and it basically has led her to believe that to get rid of it, of this certain energy, that something had to die. And so she thinks about it constantly. She describes it like static electricity, but it's like this negative or stagnant corrosive negative energy or something. It's something that she just relentlessly thinks in her head now. But this one was so bad that she was on the ledge, up on the ledge of the bridge, and Realistically, she could have died. So her mental health was so bad that she was a danger to hurting herself in a way that she could have died. But yet that doesn't qualify to get her treated. She was having a lot of conversations about if she wants to die or she wants to hurt others. So I have been in contact and have been warning the shelter, the Phoenix House and stuff. At that point, I said, like, I hope you have your sharps put away. This is what she's saying. I'm telling you this right now because you're right there. But please, she's in distress right now. She's writing me right now, and she's saying some alarming things. So I would have multiple. I was keeping an open communication with the shelter. They were doing really well, and they also had a counselor that was coming in to see her. That worked for the shelter. Now they are not by any means able to do as much therapy as she needed, but they're just a little bit. And they thought that she was so much of a danger that they actually thought, oh God, she's gonna snap and hurt somebody. And he said that she wasn't allowed at the Phoenix youth program. There's a different building that has more of an outreach. It's an outreach place where you could do lots of different programming and look for jobs there, or like have like throughout the day you could go there. That's where she kept getting lost when she was trying to go there. So, but by that point, he thought that she is a danger to herself or others, so much so that he was like, I'm sorry, you can't go there, and which is understandable. But I'm just saying that they acknowledged it. It wasn't just me that saw this. It wasn't just the police that saw this. It wasn't just social worker that saw this or her doctor. It was everybody saw this. And so when she went to the hospital that day for help with all the information they had, and they didn't admit her. It wasn't even like they released her. It's that they didn't admit her.
So
And
in this,
yeah.
so this is after being found standing on the ledge of a bridge for not the first time. When they brought her to the hospital from that, it was just, are you harmed yourself? No. Okay, you can go.
Yes.
Okay.
Part of her thing is that she's very, very particular. You have to be exact with your words. So she's very, and she's honest about it. So when she says no, I wasn't trying to kill myself. I was specifically doing this. Personally, I think the whole, do you have a plan to kill yourself and what would you use? Do you have, that is properly, I'm sorry, but that is just a liability. To say that you asked and they answered.
Her being charged as a result of whatever happens in the hospital. Like, do you know what actually led to her assaulting someone, or are you able to even say? Because I know it's still before the courts, but like, what actually leads to her getting charged?
I know as little as everyone else. I don't know much. I know that this all to me led to this, and had she have been taken in and even like had the kind of stabilized and like taken in by involuntarily, she wouldn't be either on the streets or be in the state she was in on the streets. And so to me that led a lot to it.
Okay, so the incident happens in January. After that incident, she remained living in the same shelter downtown, I believe.
When she was asked to leave for the plate breaking incident earlier that year, she made an agreement that she would abide by certain conditions if she's getting mentally unstable, and hitting the doctor meant that went against that, even though it was nothing to do with the shelter, but it went against the agreement. And so she had to leave. Then they were like, is there anywhere she could go? And I was like, no, there's not. And I don't know. And the more she's like that, the less likely she can come home. Believe me, as a mom, to have to say that, that should not have been my only, that shouldn't have been my options.
Yeah, where it seems like these incidents and these kind of touch points with police and stuff along the way, that should be driving her, you would think, closer to some kind of like hospital or inpatient facility, where it seems to be doing the opposite. It's driving her out of the shelter and further away from home. It's almost like the system as it is now, one step along that system is, and like you have to be mentally ill enough that you need to live in a tent downtown for a while before, like it
And
just seemed, yeah.
even then you have to do something horrible before, like something has to come. Even I even use the word somebody's going to get hurt, somebody's going to die.
Mhm.
It's either her or somebody else,
Mhm.
but something's going to happen. I told this to the doctor who didn't admit her, or her colleague. I'm not sure which one I was talking to, and I really wish I had that. I was just in pure fear and upset, so I didn't take down any information. But and then I talked to the constable that was there that picked her up, and I said, something's going to happen. Can you please? I needed to make sure she's safe. Everyone else is safe. Like, it's dangerous.
Mhm.
And I knew it was dangerous. And anyway, they also have expressed, and I will absolutely fight tooth and nail to protect the anonymity of the officers or the people that I spoke to, that because they have expressed that they are exhausted and they are seeing these calls all the time, and that they are tired of it, and that they are fighting this battle from the opposite side. They're doing things, they're doing mental health checks that they're not even qualified for.
Mhm.
So they were just as upset that Elliot was let go. Their frustration is palatable. And yeah, so basically it was difficult.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So it seems like all this to say is that rock bottom when it comes to mental illness is much lower than I think the average person would expect, because you've been describing Elliot from age 7 getting worse and worse, and we're talking now about violence and self thoughts of self harm. More than thoughts of self harm, it sounds like there's been more than one time she was taken off a bridge. Um, Everybody seems to be unable to help, you doing everything you can. And that's when we get to the tragic incident at the bus stop. How do you learn that something happens, first of all? Like how did it get to you that she was involved in this?
Actually, I was curled up with my dog and just I fell asleep, and I just get this call out of nowhere, and my worst fears, I didn't know at that point. I just knew that Elliot was taken into custody. She um, stabbed somebody with a knife, and I was at this point I didn't even know who the victim was, but I was still worried about the victim. I was worried about, and I was just like, no, like, because you don't understand the day that that person stabbed those 3 people in the hospital, they didn't release the name for a long time, and I was terrified that was Elliot.
Mhm. And what
Like,
for people not in Halifax, what you're describing is it was a major incident. A patient stabbed several of the workers, and it resulted in like a lockdown of the hospital and many questions being asked about how the mentally ill are treated in the hospital. So when that was going through the news, before their name was mentioned initially, you were suspecting that could have been your daughter.
I was scared. Yes,
Mhm.
I had my neighbor across the street that was saying, "Oh, do you think I just read this? Do you think this is Elliot?" So we already were afraid that it's not if, it's when. And I
Mhm.
tried so hard to tell people, and it was like my voice was hoarse basically because I was just trying to stop a train from like derailing. And
Mhm. Tell me about when you get this call and you find out Elliot was involved in a stabbing, she's been arrested. How do you realize that the stabbing is one thing, but the stabbing of a young child obviously is something different? What is that like hearing that? Because clearly that's
okay,
the worst case scenario.
that's when I thought it couldn't get worse. And what happened is my neighbor messaged me and said, "Are you okay?" And I was like, yeah, like what I'm upset and stuff like that. But she already talked to me since then. So I thought, oh, that's so weird that out of nowhere she was saying it. And then she goes, did you see the news? And I said, no. And she goes, I'm coming over right now. And I went on the news while she was on her way, and I went, and right away, my spine, that is the worst thing that somebody could do. That is I didn't think that I could be more upset, because it wasn't even on my radar that could happen, that somebody that young could be the victim of this. And I wanted to throw up. I was feeling nauseous. I was feeling, I couldn't. And right at the same time, my partner phones from work, and we are a mess. He just probably at like within minutes, he saw this post too, and he just said, I'm coming home. He goes, I can't do this. And we're both bawling. That's somebody's baby. That is somebody's child. And that is, I can't even explain. That is the worst thing that I could ever. And it's not that I don't care about adults. I don't even know. That's somebody's baby, and that is a child. I get the gravity of this, and I get the heinous type of horrible violence that inflicted on the most innocent and vulnerable of our society. And that, to me, it kills me. Like, I can't even explain it. And so for me, I don't even know what I can do for those parents. Like, I have no words. I can't do anything, but that's the whole reason why that's the whole reason why I need this to not happen again. It's the only thing I got. It's the only way to repair any sense of safety to them, is I have to do something, bring awareness that the streets will never be safe if we don't address the things that are uncomfortable for the very severely unwell, and how somebody's illness progresses in a way that you can look at a child who looks like every other child without enough or without the specific care, which she did get when she was younger. It was a lot better, but it can end up like this. And I'm not doing this for an excuse for Elliott. My daughter is behind bars now, and she will be for probably a decade. Whether people think that that's sad or not, it is not I know that my daughter did the unforgivable to people, in people's eyes. I get that, but she is my daughter. She's 19, and she's not going to be. Don't worry, the system doesn't happen the way it does in movies. People don't just get off on insanity pleas or anything. They don't even call that anymore. This happened. I don't know what to do with it. Can we please start to fix things and start to hold our policymakers, the people in charge, the people who have no idea what is actually happening? Can we please start holding them accountable and start making them help us? Because I'm going to tell you something. Arguing about if you want to, hang Elliott from a pole or not is not going to help keep children safe, keep the general population safe, not going to have families stay together. It's not going to help with the homelessness. It's not going to help with the burnout that the police are seeing, and all the expenses that are going towards the policing that have to just sit there for 10 hours not taking other calls. This is a problem that affects every single one of us, whether you know somebody with mental illness or not. This will only get worse. For that young child, I think it's our duty to make our world safer. And what is there for mental health here? Because a lot of people don't know that. A lot of people are like, well, she should have just been in an asylum. Well, there's not such thing as an asylum anymore.
Like in a perfect world, what would have existed or what should have existed that could have prevented this? Like in a perfect world, what kind of institution or center could Elliot have gone into when she decided to leave the home? Like what would have stopped this?
That's a good question, and I would be fooling myself if I would be able to answer fully. I would like to see a more of the funding go to mental health programs, preventative ones,
Mhm.
and I would like to see something. We need to relook at the involuntary holds. And I know that's not a popular thing for me to say, and I'm all about consent
Mhm.
and and people's rights, but the rights of the little boy needed to be addressed. The rights to healthcare and advocating for somebody when they're being expected to use their body part that isn't working, their organ that's not working, which at this time is the brain, and they're not making safe decisions. And I don't really know because all I know is it's got to be warmer than an institution.
Mhm.
It's got to be a little more about the stabilizing and rehabilitation of the people. And it has to be a lot more preventative.
You mentioned at this point you're expecting it's going to be a long time before Elliot is a danger to herself or someone else. Uh, have you? I'm assuming you've been in contact with Elliot since the incident. Like, does she comprehend what has happened, or is she aware of what's happened, or can you say anything at all about her state now?
I can't really speak to that. It's still up and down. The assessment hasn't been done yet. We're kind of in a limbo until then.
Mhm.
She's struggling. She's struggling.
I've seen some pretty bad stuff said online, and a lot of it is things like, and we've said this already tonight, is Elliot should be hung from the pole. She should be locked away forever. The key thrown away. Like as a mom, hearing your daughter spoken about like this, what is that like? I think that's something that a lot of people have never experienced, fortunately. But what does that been like?
Well, I try not to listen to those people as a mom. I try to listen to them as individuals outraged by something that happened to a child. And I can understand that. I can also understand that they are limited in what they know, and I can never fault somebody for not knowing what they don't know. The thing that I want to make clear, and that's really, really important, is that that doesn't help that little boy. That doesn't help any future victims. That doesn't help anybody that's dealing with this on the front lines and any families. I know that this is heartbreaking. Believe me, I look back at my feelings. If we weren't outraged, then we would be in serious trouble as a society. However, we need to keep going. We need to not just do the outrage. We need to be better than that. And that's not as simple as, oh, I'll tell you how it won't happen again. We don't have the luxury to think so small.
I want to thank you for joining us for this episode of Nighttime. I want to again end this episode by wishing my best to everyone affected by this tragic story. It's even more clear to me now that when push comes to shove, the social safety nets that we assume to be there may not be. In this case, they weren't, and an innocent child almost paid the ultimate price as a result. And like Andrea says, we owe it to that child to advocate for them and for everyone else. This is a case I plan to cover via follow-up episodes, so if anyone listening has any connection to the case, I'd be very interested in talking to you. You can reach me at nighttimepodcast.com/contact. Now, with all that said, I'm going to start wrapping up this episode, but before I do, let me give some thanks. First, a huge and sincere thank you to Andrea for sharing this difficult story with us. It takes bravery to reveal so much, but you made it clear why it's important to you, and I respect that. Now, I also want to give a big thanks to Monty, Datta, who contributes to the music for this show, and Linz from the Dystopian Simulation podcast, who provides my voiceovers. But then lastly, and most importantly, a massive thank you goes to each and every one of you listening to Nighttime, as without your interest and your support, this show would be impossible. On the topic of support, let me thank the newest subscribers to the premium feed. A Moment in Crime, Tony, and Kayla, we appreciate you. And for anyone else who'd like to support the show, you can help us out here in a variety of ways. First of all, the premium feed subscription costs just a couple bucks a month, and that money will fund the creation of new episodes, but the premium feed will also give you those episodes 2 days early, give them to you ad-free, and give you access to a back catalog of Nighttime episodes. If that sounds like something you're interested in, you can go premium at nighttimepodcast.com/subscribe. And even if you don't want to go premium, you can still support the show by sharing this episode on social media and telling all your like-minded friends why they should listen. If anyone out there has any story ideas, wants to give feedback on the show, or would like to add a question or comment to be aired and responded to in an upcoming episode, you can do all that and more at nighttimepodcast.com. And with all that said, take care of each other, hug your loved ones tight, and let me know if you see anything weird.
The Nighttime Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Jordan Bonaparte.
Yeah. Something we talked about in our original episode, and this is something I think I read in the CBC report, is Elliott was eventually diagnosed with autism, but the journey to become diagnosed is something that spanned like a decade. Can you talk about what you had to go through to make that happen?
Yes, in rural Nova Scotia, the autism assessments get done before you enter into school, and if you make it to grade 12, that's another assessment period, because they don't have enough people to do the assessments that are qualified. With that being said, we know when things become more complex socially, that's when females start presenting with autism. And females, because there's not that entry point in grade 5, they get put on a list. And what happened is Elliott got put on a list, and she was struggling. And every time we went to any kind of professional or teacher, new anybody, they would say, has she been assessed for autism? And we'd say, she's on the list. And so her number came up again when she was in grade 12. And by that point, she stopped school. Her father passed away. Her mental health was so bad. She ended up getting the assessment done because when she was at one of her times in the Guerin Center, the doctor said, by the way, has she ever been assessed for autism? And I said, she's on the list. And they said, well, we have somebody here that is like the head of the, I guess, autism assessment. They're going to pull a favor and get her assessed. And sure enough, they came down with their report afterwards, showed that that's just another thing that she had that was compounded. So by not getting the assessment early, she has anxiety and depression and all those things. Early intervention is key. And it just further made the bullying worse, made everything just so much more worse. And so that's one thing that I think needs to be changed. However, that being said, I just recently found out that the government is finally, for the time being, they're allowing something that they wouldn't before, and that is to use they will pay for private assessments because of the backlog. Oh. But for over a decade, it wasn't like that. And that is a lot that alone is leading females to be further. If they make it to grade 12, they can get the help, but it's not equitable, and it's not okay in Canada.